Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. The scientist who invented the communications satellite. The writer of 2010. And now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
This is the editorial office of The Sun, one of Sri Lanka's most popular newspapers. The journalists behind me are writing up tomorrow's edition. Stories of politics, sports, human interest, the kind of material that sells newspapers all over the world. But there's one kind of story that The Sun thrives on, that you'll hardly ever see in the Western press. And there are bulging files on it here. These are stories of reincarnation. They tell of young children who, often as soon as they can speak, talk about their real parents and their other homes. They seem to recall previous lives, often in such detail that they not only provide good copy for local journalists, but they persuade researchers all over the world that there's a phenomenon here worth investigating. Here's a story of a little boy, Ajit, who remembers drowning 5 years ago. And here is a story about a little 5-year-old girl who thinks she's a man who was killed in a road accident. But the story which most fascinates me is one that comes from the place I love most in Sri Lanka, the beautiful little bay of Unawatuna on the shores of the Indian Ocean. The story is a tragic reminder of Sri Lanka's brief but bloody insurrection of 1971. A captured rebel, a young man named Robert, leapt to his death into the sea. His close companion, Johnny, had already been killed. These twin girls were not born until 7 years later, yet almost as soon as they could speak, they claimed to be reincarnations of Johnny and Robert. Shiromi recounts gruesome details of Johnny's death. Shivanti says she remembers leaping into the sea with her wrists wired together. Such stories are intriguing, but for them to be accepted as evidence of reincarnation, every detail must be checked by a trusted investigator.
Journalist Delreen Vijayaratne covers many reincarnation stories. The latest comes from a jungle village, Pethiyagada. In this case, 4-year-old Inoka is the child who claims to have lived before. The story goes that when she first began to talk, Inoka told her mother, Rita Sriyani, that she had another family. They lived in a town called Minawangada. She claimed to remember having 2 sisters and a brother. They lived in much less primitive surroundings. Their house had running water and electricity. Inoka's mother says she'd never believed in reincarnation, and she certainly wasn't going to trek 6 miles through the jungle to Minawangada to check Inoka's claims. But Inoka's grandmother, Kiriyama, did listen to the tales of the little girl, and in the end was persuaded to take her to Minawangada. They soon discovered that 8 years before, an 11-year-old girl called Milani had died in a motorbike accident. She'd had 1 brother and 2 sisters, and they'd lived in this modern house. It all fitted Inoka's description. When she was taken there, her first reactions amazed her mother, Rita Sriyani.
She was no stranger in that house, and her first question was, "Where's my doll?" She started calling the mother of her previous life, Mummy, and Rita Sriyani was quite unhappy about it. And she was asking for all the toys of her previous birth.
The girls say Inoka knew their names the first time she came to play. And she went straight to this cupboard for the dead girl's suitcase of toys. She identified Milani's photograph as my picture, and she calls Mrs. Godagampala her real mother.
And what difference did Inoka's
So the strange claims Inoka made when she began to speak have brought great happiness to a family that no longer mourns.
Stories of this kind are very rare in Britain. One of the most remarkable began in 1957 in Northumberland, in the country town of Hexham.
It was there one Sunday morning that tragedy struck John Pollock and his family. His 2 daughters and a friend were killed by a car on their way to church. Jacqueline was 6 and Joanna 11 when they died, but John Pollock did not despair while Hexham grieved. He believed that his wife would conceive twins, that the girls would be reborn.
From the moment I knew she was pregnant, I believed that the girls would come back.
And against all the doctor's predictions, Florence Pollock did produce twin girls.
The first thing I noticed when I saw those twins was, we hadn't named them then, but the younger one of the 2 had a scar coming across her forehead down onto the bridge of her nose, which was the identical scar that Jacqueline, the younger one of the girls that had been killed, had when she fell off a little tricycle when she was about 2 years old. Also, I didn't see at the time, but later, my wife said to me, it's an incredible thing, but she's also got the birthmark on her left hip that Jacqueline had. Jacqueline had a birthmark on her left hip, which was like a brown thumbprint.
To this day, Jennifer still has that brown birthmark. Mrs. Pollock was astonished when she gave the twins the dead girls' dolls.
When I got these 2 dolls out, one said, oh, that's Mary, and that's Susan. And it was exactly the same names as my other daughters had named them. And that was the sort of really turning point in my way of thinking.
So convinced were the Pollocks that their daughters had been reborn, that even the children's grave no longer held any sorrow for them.
There's a grave there, but it means nothing. To me, to bring flowers or anything on the grave would be sheer hypocrisy, because I don't believe that they're here. I mean, it's just a symbol of 2 girls that lived that were reborn.
Till now the concept was that the brain is the producer of consciousness and the producer of memories. And when you study near-death experience, then you have to say, well, we have to reconsider this concept. And perhaps we should consider the brain not as a producer, but as a receiver of consciousness. And that's a kind of revolution.
In a scientific study based on multiple cases of NDE or near-death experiences in cardiac arrest patients, recently published in the prestigious British science publication, The Lancet, major NDE scientific findings, as revealed by the sustained medical research of Dr. Ping Van Lommel, are daring to suggest the impossible, that there is evidence that the mind could live on after the brain stopped functioning. The medical research proved, under rigid methodology, the unthinkable, that the mind is not a product of the brain. Dr. Van Lommel's research indicates that our consciousness is not located within our physical body. These findings strongly suggest that memories and thought processes must occur outside of the physical body. Ergo, the brain is merely a transmitter rather than a receptacle of thought and memory. Where then do memory and thought occur? Could it be in that sublime, intangible, and incorporeal being we call the spirit?
One of the patients in Dr. Van Lommel's study was a man who'd been found in a meadow, having suffered a heart attack. He was brought to hospital where the medical team carried out extensive cardiopulmonary resuscitation, during which time he displayed all 3 signs of clinical death. His heart and breathing had stopped, and his pupils dilated.
Shocking!
When the patient was stabilized, he remained in a coma for 1 week.
And after 1 week, he came back on the cardiac ward, and the nurse who was there during the resuscitation came in for the first time to give him medication, and the patient said, "You were the one who was there when I was brought in."
You were there when they brought me into the hospital. You took the dentures out of my mouth and put them on that cart. It had all these bottles on it. There was a sliding drawer underneath, and there you put my teeth.
And the nurse was flabbergasted. He said, "This is not possible. Possibly this patient was in deep coma, couldn't see anything." But the patient told him that he could see everything from above his body. And he could see the doctors and the nurses what they done. So during the period of coma, he could perceive in a position out and above us.
better understand this, let's say for example a musical instrument, say a guitar. Is the guitar by itself the music? Is it stored in the instrument? Certainly not, though it plays music, and music seems to be generated in the strings and the wood. But the creative ideas, the sequence of notes and silences, the melody or the harmony comes from elsewhere, in this case, the musician. The brain has been, until now, considered by traditional science to be the producer, the generator of thoughts, ideas, emotions, and perceptions. But now, in view of these advances in serious medical investigation, that assumption has been challenged, leaving way to a more profound understanding of what the conscious mind really is. So, if you believe that it is your brain the one that generates your thinking and not your spirit, well, think again.